Now that you have a general idea of what the critical reasoning questions are and how they are structured, let's review some general tips that will help you manage critical reasoning questions of all types. 1. Always read the question stem. When you see a critical reasoning question, read the question stem, the question, before you start reading the argument. If you read the argument first and then read the stem, you will probably have to use up time rereading the argument to find specific details required to answer the question. If you read the question stem first, then when you read the argument, you will already know what you have to look for. For example, if the question stem asks you to identify the flaw in the argument, then while you read the argument, you will be looking for reasoning errors. If the question asks you to draw a conclusion, then you will pay extra attention to the information or evidence in the argument, and so on. There are different question types requiring different approaches that we will cover in detail, but for all question types, you should read the question stem first and only then proceed to the argument. 2. Read the argument carefully. Unlike the large reading comprehension questions, critical reasoning arguments are comparatively short, 30 to 120 words, and you should pay attention to every single detail. The difference between a correct and an incorrect answer can be in a subtle detail or a single word. Make sure you understand all the statements in the argument. Evaluate evidence presented in the argument as it is written. If the argument states that it is possible to increase sales of product X, for example, that does not mean that sales of product X will or should be increased. All it means is that it is possible to increase sales. 3. Try to predict the correct answer. Before you read and evaluate the answer choices, form an idea of what the correct answer choice should look like. If one of the answer choices resembles your prediction, then chances are good, though not 100%, that it is the right one. Of course, it is sometimes very hard to predict the correct answer. In such cases, just read the answer choices and pick the best one. 4. Read all the answer choices. Even if you see a choice that resembles your prediction, you still need to read the others. Start with the first choice and read them one by one. Eliminate answer choices that are obviously wrong and choose the best of any that remain. If you think that the first choice does the trick, read the remaining choices anyway, in case one of them is even better. For example, if you are asked to strengthen the argument, and you see that the first choice indeed makes the argument's conclusion likely to be true, read the other choices anyway. It could be that the last answer choice will absolutely prove the conclusion, in which case it would be the answer that most strengthens the argument. Remember to look for the best answer choice. Even if you see an answer choice that would work, another answer could still be better, so consider them all. 5. Eliminate answer choices that are beyond the scope of the argument. Pay attention to the evidence provided in the argument and do not pick answer choices that are outside the argument scope. For example, consider this question again. Take about 2 minutes to read the argument and eliminate answer choices that are outside the scope of the argument. Now let's look at this question together. What is the scope of this argument? It is concerned with the total number of thefts committed in the two towns and the change in this number over the last 5 years. Choice A is out of scope. We only have information about thefts. Crime rate as a whole is outside the scope of this argument, and we cannot infer anything about it without knowing about other crimes. It is quite possible that while the number of thefts has increased, the number of other crimes has decreased. In addition, rate is a measure that takes account of population size, and no information is given about the size, relative size, or change in size of the two towns' populations. Choice B is also out of scope. There is no information about the per capita number of thefts, which also requires population size data that is not included in the argument. Choice C is out of scope. The argument is concerned only with the number of thefts committed, and there is nothing in the argument that would allow us to make inferences about the relative overall attractiveness of the two towns to new residents. That information depends upon much more than frequency or even change in frequency of crime. Choice D is out of scope. There is no information about numbers of thieves. It could be that all the thefts committed in Laytonville were committed by one thief. Choice E is the only choice within the scope of the argument. If the number of thefts committed in the two towns was the same 5 years ago, and the number in Laytonville has increased by a greater percentage since then, more thefts have now been committed in Laytonville than in Stoneville. This information can be properly inferred from the passage. Choice E is correct. You have to be very careful when reading GMAT arguments and picking the correct answer. Some of the answer choices will tend to confuse you by offering notions that are closely related to the argument. In this example, number of thefts got mixed up with number of thieves, per capita number of thefts, and crime rate. You have no information about any of them, however. They are all outside the scope of this argument. All the argument considers is the number of thefts, and its conclusion cannot go any farther than that. 6. Pay extra attention to extremes and quantities. If the evidence is about some people, you cannot draw conclusions about all people. If the conclusion is about something that will happen, then evidence or an assumption that this or that may or is likely to happen is not sufficient proof. Extreme words include all, always, never, nobody, everybody, and will. Extreme words are rarely part of good arguments on the GMAT. The best answer choices usually contain less extreme words, such as some, many, often, sometimes, and may. If you want to choose an answer that contains an extreme word or a quantity word, make sure that it is logical. If extreme language is a part of the argument, then the correct answer may use it as well. 7. Consider all the information provided in the argument. Since critical reasoning arguments are rather short, you should assume that most of the information provided is essential. Even if a certain piece of information provided in the argument seems unnecessary or not related to other evidence, you should still consider it, as it is likely to be important. 8. Treat all the information provided in arguments as true. Even if your own experience tells you otherwise, accept premises as true for logical purposes. For example, if one of the premises states that gas prices have been decreasing over the last year, and you know that they have not, you nevertheless evaluate the argument as if those prices were decreasing.